Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Now, if you're interested in any kind of filmmaking, whether it be with drones, GoPros, mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, you're in the right place. I bring you along on hikes with me, trying to find cinematic footage, giving you tips and tricks on how you can improve your footage. So let's crack on and see what we can find today. Okay, so I've just come across this lock down here, and we're going to use this as our subject. We're going to dial in the settings, showing you how we do shutter speed, ISO and aperture first off. And then I'm going to show you how we can change the aperture to get different depths of field, even though the lighting conditions don't allow it. So let's have a look at it. Okay, so I've got the camera all set up on the tripod, and we're looking at the mechanism here. This is what we're going to be focusing on. This is going to be our subject. Now, I've got our shutter speed at double our recording frame rate. As you have seen in previous videos, that's always should be double your recording frame rate, your shutter speed. So because I'm recording at 30 frames per second, mine's locked off at 1/60th. That's going to give us the most natural looking motion blur. At the minute, the image is really overexposed, and we can tell this by our meter reading. It's saying +2. Our aperture at the minute is f3.2. Hopefully you can see it on the screen. And our ISO is 1000. So let me show you how we dial this in. First off, we lower the ISO. Just get it to the lowest possible setting on your camera. And there we go, we're at 100. Already we're starting to see the image appear. But now let's raise our aperture until we get the exposure correct. And there we go. We've got an aperture of f8. And our meter reading is saying it's exposed correctly. I can see that it's exposed correctly. So that's how you would dial it in normally. But now, because the light is so bright, we cannot lower our aperture without overexposing our image. We can raise the aperture and make it darker, and then we could raise our ISO to brighten our image. But what happens if we want to lower our aperture and get more blur in the background of our subject? Well, that's what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so the way we can lower our aperture and get more depth of field on our subject is by using one of these. This is called a variable ND filter. Now, you can just buy normal ND filters and have a set of them in your bag, but I just like to carry one, and this is a variable ND filter. It's made up of two pieces of polarizing glass, and when you rotate the filter in one direction, it restricts the amount of light entering the camera. And when you rotate it in the opposite direction, it allows more light into your camera. So let's stick this on the front of the lens and show you how it works. Okay, so we've put our variable ND filter on the front of our lens here. I'm using the 56mm Sigma at the minute. As you can see, it's letting quite a lot of light in at the moment. But what happens as we rotate the filter? Hopefully you can see that it's restricting the amount of light and going darker into the camera. This allows us to control the light entering the camera and adjust our aperture to get more depth of field onto our subject. Okay, so we've got the variable ND filter on the front of the lens now, and hopefully you can just about make out an image there on my monitor. Sorry if it's a bit reflective. It's very sunny today, but hopefully you can see something. But watch what happens to the image as we rotate the variable ND filter. Hopefully you notice it's now very underexposed. Basically, we're restricting the light entering the camera. If we rotate the other way, obviously the image comes back and we allow more light into the camera. We can use this to control our aperture and get different depths of field on our subject. Okay, so with the variable ND filter on and at its lowest setting, meaning that it's letting the most amount of light in, we're going to have to adjust the settings to get the correct exposure first to see where we're at. Because we're at ISO 100, we can leave that. Shutter speed is 1/60th, that's locked off. Now let's have a look at the aperture and lower it down till we get the correct exposure. And there we go, at f5.6, we're now getting the correct exposure. But remember, we can turn and restrict the amount of light coming into the camera even more to lower that aperture. So let's do that right now. Let's turn it even to the highest setting. As you can see now, we've gone overexposed and very dark. So let's keep lowering our aperture to the lowest we can probably go to make sure we're correctly exposed. And there we go. With an aperture of f2.2, we're correctly exposed with an ISO of 100, giving us greater depth of field from our subject. Let me show you how it comes straight out of the camera. And here is that video at f2.2. Notice the background blur and where your focus is drawn to. Let's take the filter off and have a look what it would look like at f8. And here it is at f8. Notice the background now a lot more in focus. Let's go back again to the f2.2. So by using our variable ND filter, we can lower the aperture and control our depth of field. Okay, so there you go. By using the variable ND filter on the front of the lens, we can either restrict the amount of light coming into the camera or allow more light into the camera. That gives us control over our aperture and our depth of field from our subject. Now, just one word of advice about variable ND filters. If you're looking to buy one, they range in price from as little as £5 and go all the way up to probably £300–400. Avoid the cheap ones. They just don't work properly. They'll give you all kinds of wacky results, and yeah, they're not worth their money. This one here is about £50–60. It's by K&F. It's called a K&F Nano one, and I'll link it in the description for you. This one works fine, but try to avoid the cheap ones, like I say. Anyway, let's crack on walking and see what else we can find using the variable ND filter to control our depth of field. Whatever I do, don't slip now. Please don't slip. No slipping. Must not slip. Don't slip. It really has turned into a beautiful day. A great day for filming. Okay, so I've just come across this rather lovely scene here with the boat outside this house near the lock. I'm going to run through the settings with you one more time with the variable ND filter on, going through the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, how we actually dial it in with the variable ND filter on, and showing you the results. What I'm also going to do here is take a photo of this and give it away completely free to anybody that wants it. It'll be in the description, a link to it, because I think this is quite an amazing shot. So let's have a look how we dial this in. Okay, hopefully you can see the image on the screen there. We're overexposed, but that's what we're taking the video of. I will also, like I say, be taking a photo of this one. Now the variable ND filter is on the front of the lens. At the minute, we're really overexposed. All I'm going to do first off is just make sure that the variable ND filter is at the most open it can be, allowing the most light in. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to lower our ISO to 100. Shutter speed, again, that's locked off. Don't touch that. Double our recording frame rate, 1/60th. So let's start dialing in this aperture and getting our meter reading correct for our exposure. So there we go. We've got all the settings dialed in. The variable ND filter's on. It's making no difference to this particular shot because I want the most depth of field. And all I'm going to do, just to be sure it's in focus, I'm going to hit autofocus mode on the camera, let it detect everything. Then I'm going to switch back to manual focus mode. This way the continuous autofocus mode ain't going to be hunting around for focus if the lighting should change or anything like that. So I know everything's in focus and I'm ready to take the shot. Let's have a look, see how this one turned out. And this is a great example of leaving the variable ND filter on even though it's not really needed. Just because we can control the depth of field and we can get that nice shallow depth of field with a variable ND filter doesn't mean we have to. We can still get everything in focus. So you can just leave your variable ND filter on all day. You don't have to keep taking it on and off. Using variable ND filters are really necessary, especially on bright sunny days. Gives you that control over that aperture when too much light is entering your camera. On overcast days or if you're in dark environments, they're not really needed. So yeah, if you're going out on a bright sunny day, get yourself a variable ND filter and control that depth of field with your aperture. Okay, here's a great money saving tip for you guys if you are looking to buy a variable ND filter, if you're ready to take that step. Now they come in different sizes. It's normally in millimeters, and you buy the correct size variable ND filter for the lens that you're using. But say you have multiple lenses or you're looking to buy lenses in the future. Now, the problem is your variable ND filter will only fit onto one of them lenses. because every lens has a different size diameter. So what you can do is buy the biggest one you can, buy the biggest variable ND filter you can afford. They normally go up a little bit in price depending on their size. For example, here I have a 72mm variable ND filter, and it's on a 52mm lens. But how do you make it fit? Well, the simple answer is you buy these cheap step-up rings. They cost about £5 each. So one variable ND filter can fit onto multiple lenses. Just don't make sure you don't buy a small one, because then you can't put it on a larger lens. If you've got a larger variable ND filter, you can put it on a smaller lens, but not the other way around. So that's a great money saving tip for you guys. Yeah, so just buy the biggest variable ND filter you can afford. I use a 72mm and then use step up rings to put it on multiple lenses. The through the gate shot. Every video's got to have one. Okay, so I've just come across this bridge now. I'm going to show you the setup without the variable ND. Then we're going to put the variable ND and compare the two shots. So let's have a look at the settings. Hopefully you can see them settings there. We're at 1/60th, double our recording frame rate. We got an aperture of f13, meaning we haven't got no depth of field. Everything should be in focus. We're slightly overexposed just because it was a little bit too dark. And I've got an ISO of 200. And here is that shot straight out of camera. Actually quite a nice looking shot for some reason. Everything's in focus, not very cinematic, but still a nice shot. But let's stick the variable ND filter on and lower that aperture. Okay, so at the minute the variable ND filter is letting in as much light as it can. But let's really darken it up now so we can lower that aperture. I'm also going to lower my ISO here to 100. Now let's have a look how as we lower our aperture, see what we can go to. The lower the better here. I really want depth of field from the railings to the house. So we're stepping down. I'm just going to go overexposed slightly. We can probably go a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to keep that at 1.8 there. Now, let's see how this one turns out. And here is that same shot with aperture of f1.8. Notice the amount of blur we're now getting and where your focus is drawn. So if we didn't have our variable ND filter with us today, we wouldn't be able to get this amount of blur and depth of field in our shot. Let's have a look at it again with no filter on the camera. You can see without the variable ND filter what a difference it makes. Let's have a look again with the filter. And just because we're using the variable ND filter and are able to control our aperture and get more depth of field, we don't necessarily have to focus on the thing that's closest to us. Let me show you what I mean. That's right, because we can control our depth of field, we don't necessarily have to blur the background object. We can actually blur the foreground object and make the background object in focus. Pretty neat, hey? So there you've seen, you don't necessarily need to blur the background object. You can also blur the foreground object, making your background subject in focus, giving great depth of field. So by stepping down our aperture, getting more depth of field into our video clips, we can draw the viewer's eye to the subject that we want them to focus on. It's a great way of adding interest and intrigue into your videos. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching this. This is going to bring this episode to an end. Get yourself a variable ND filter, stick it on your lens. Don't cheap out on a cheap one, they're naff. But then you can take control of how much light enters your camera and control your aperture, giving you greater depth of field from your subject. Anyway, thank you very much again for watching. If you have any questions, comment below. If you've enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy my content or want to see further content from myself, why not subscribe to the channel? Look out next week for the cinematic of everything I filmed today. Thank you very much. We'll catch up in the next video. Yeah, thank you once again for watching. It really means a lot to me. Stay safe out there, guys, at the minute, and be sure to give it a thumbs up and a like and subscribe if you want to see further videos. Thank you very much again for watching.